Newsfirst Newsline with Faraz Shaukat.
Good morning and a very warm welcome to Newsline, live from the Dawson's Road studios here in Colombo. And joining me this morning is Mr. W.A. Vijay Wardner, a former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank. Very good morning to you.
Very good morning to you, Faraz.
And we're minus Bandula this morning, but don't mind that. He's having a short break, I think. How are the state of our finances, the nation's finances? What's happening?
Well, of course, Faraz, now Sri Lanka has been in this financial crisis for a long period of time. Right now, we are at the middle of a serious foreign exchange crisis, serious budgetary crisis, and as a result, the country will have to follow a very painful course of action in order to take the country out of the present malaise that we are suffering from. And as a result, the authorities will have to take notice of the ongoing crisis situation and prepare the people to face how they should come out of this crisis today. And
do you think that the finances are being managed properly?
Well, what has happened is, even in the past, we had the situation where the finances had not been managed properly. And when the new government came to power, everybody expected new government to make a change. But unfortunately, what happened was that they followed the same procedures, same systems, and same practices. And as a result, instead of recovering from the previous financial crisis, we are now deep into the crisis today. So it is the correct situation we are in today in Sri Lanka.
And Mr. Jordan, what about the Treasury bond market? What's happening there?
Yeah, in the Treasury bond market, for us, in the recent past, the central bank had been cancelling the Treasury bond and Treasury bill auctions very often. Why the central bank did so was to prevent the market interest rate from going up. The reason is that there's a shortage of liquidity in the market, and the liquidity has also been created by the central bank itself by selling foreign exchange through Bank of Ceylon to maintain the exchange rate at the current level of 143.90 cents per US dollar. And as a result, in order to overcome the present shortage of liquidity in the market, the central bank had to cancel all these auctions because otherwise the interest rates in the market would have gone up. So it's a creation of the central bank itself.
So, but at the moment we have quite high interest rates.
Well, the interest rates are actually determined not by the central bank. Interests are determined by the market. And why the market demands such high interest rates is that market wants to compensate itself for the increasing inflation rate, because everybody wants some real income out of the savings that they have made. And because of this reason, the interest rates will have to go up in the market, because now the inflation rate is now picking up in Sri Lanka, as announced by the Census and Statistics Department for February. The core inflation, which matters to the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, has gone up from 4.7% to 5.6%. So it is picking up. So people are expecting a higher remuneration for their savings. Otherwise, the people are losing their money. And because of this reason, we have to have these high interest rates in the market.
And what about savings? What's the level? Do we have figures on what level of savings?
Savings are not actually at adequate levels in Sri Lanka throughout our post-independence history. It's not a new phenomenon, because if we earn, say, 100 rupees today, Sri Lankans were saving only about 80 rupees out of that. So about 20 rupees out of that. So 80 rupees had been spent by Sri Lankans. We can compare this for us with a country like Singapore, where when they get 100 Singaporean dollars, they save about 50 Singapore dollars out of that.
Oh, I
Even
see.
China also has a very high savings rate. Malaysia has very high savings rate. And when we compare ourselves with those countries,
Yeah.
our savings rates are pretty much lower than the global average.
That's astonishing. I also want to ask you another thing. What I can't help notice is that as you travel around the main roads, main high streets, I notice that there are lots of pawning centers. Does this mean that all of Sri Lanka or much of Sri Lanka is on a roll? That they're rolling their money, they're pawning it one at the beginning, then they redeem it, and then again, is that prevalent?
Well, for us now, the culture, Sri Lanka's culture is that whenever people have some excess money,
Yeah,
they buy gold.
right.
And whenever they have a shortage of money, what they do is they pawn the gold that they hold and they try to convert that into money, cash. So, right now there are banks which accept pawning. Bank of Ceylon is the one of the leading banks in the pawning industry, People's Bank, then National Savings Bank and so forth. And what would happen is that
Yes, carry on.
what will happen is that when these banks are getting the customers to pawn their jewellery,
Yeah,
there are certain procedures which might not be favorable to the customer. So that is why
Yeah.
we find private pawning operators are working in Sri Lanka,
Yeah.
and the systems that they adopt
Yeah.
is pretty much simpler than the systems adopted by the other banks that also conduct pawning as one of their leading businesses.
So, not recently, I say maybe a year or maybe 2 years ago, we had a situation where I think the banks, the people who had lent the money, the banks and the pawning institutions and so on, found themselves in a sort of a negative equity situation.
Yes, that is because because pawning, when banks go into pawning for us,
Yeah,
they don't extend credit up to 100% of the value of the pawned jewellery.
right.
There's a percentage where they keep, which is called the haircut, which is about 25%.
Yeah,
If the free market prices of gold has fallen below that 25% level, then the bank has to incur cost.
Right.
And that is the cost you are referring. And that is why banks had to write off a significant amount of their profits. Large banks or all banks were affected by that. And they had to write off a significant percentage of their profits because the pre-market price of gold had declined from around $1,600 per fine ounce to $1,200 per fine ounce. So, but of course, right now we don't have that kind of a situation because the gold prices are stable now.
I see.
Yeah.
While we've been chatting and experiencing a small power cut, I've had a viewer send me this rather long question. Well, let's see. It is no secret that in the previous administration there was a serious conflict between the Treasury and the central bank. Foreign borrowings, foreign exchange reserve, devaluation of the rupee, etc. Central bank had absolutely no say, as it was the Treasury who did everything, and the result is the current predicament. How has this affected the larger economy?
Well, that was actually the situation that prevailed in Sri Lanka during the previous administration, because the Minister of Finance was dominating over the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, and most of the decisions were taken not in the Central Bank but in the Ministry of Finance. For example, in 2013, the decision to depreciate Sri Lanka rupee came as a surprise to central bank people, because the decision was taken by the Ministry of Finance, and the President Mahinda Rajapaksa, as the Minister of Finance, he announced it in Parliament, and that was the time when the central bank officers came to know that the rupee had been depreciated.
I see.
So this is a very bad situation in Sri Lanka, because in a country like Sri Lanka, we have created an independent institution called Central Bank to conduct monetary policy. If the monetary policy decisions are taken by the Ministry of Finance, then there is actually the conflict of interest which the viewer has referred to here.
And this is going on a bit. Perhaps he must be an economist, or at least a frustrated economist, is that because he's followed up with another one. Isn't it good to allow demand and supply to determine the rupee to dollar value rather than pumping borrowed funds to sustain an artificial value?
Well, that particular viewer is correct for us, because what happens in any market is that it's the demand and the supply forces in the market that would determine the value of any commodity. Now, money is also commodity, and there's a demand for Sri Lanka rupee and there's a supply of Sri Lanka rupee, and if the demand is higher for Sri Lanka rupee, the value of the Sri Lanka rupee will go up. But in a situation where the supply of Sri Lanka rupee is higher than the demand for Sri Lanka rupee, the value will go down. Now, that is exactly where we are in Sri Lanka today. So, in order to overcome that problem, what the government had been doing in the past as well as today, they borrow money out of from all the sources available, use that borrowed money to defend the value of the Sri Lanka rupee, which cannot be sustained over the long run. You can do it for maybe 1 week or 1 month or even 1 year, you can do that. But if it is longer than that, the country will come to a situation where you don't have enough foreign exchange to defend the currency, and as a result, then you have to allow the currency to depreciate, and then there will be a free fall of the Sri Lanka rupee. This is exactly what happened in 1997 in Thailand.
And it says here that previously there was $7.6 billion of foreign exchange reserve, and he's asking, but how much of this would have been borrowed funds, and does this not defeat the fundamental purpose?
Well, that is actually out of that, in fact the correct figure was 8.5 billion US dollars.
Yeah.
Out of the 8.5 billion, about 75% represented borrowed money.
Right.
Not the money that we have earned through our export of foreign commodities and sale of goods to the rest of the world.
From all this, what I can gather is that it's absolutely essential that we have the correct people running the central bank.
That is true. That is true for us, because when the central bank was created as an independent institution in 1950, the objective was that the central bank should be manned by professional people.
Right.
There should be professional people at the top of the central bank as the governor, deputy governor. Then there should be professional people as the members of the monetary board, which is charged with the function of conducting these policies on behalf of the country in the central bank. So without these professional people, we cannot depend on the on the central. We can rely on the people inside the central bank to maintain the value of the Sri Lanka rupee and also conduct proper economic policies in the country.
So is it fair to say then that countries like let's say in England, in Britain, for example, I think the interest rates, there's no interference from the government.
There is no, because in the United Kingdom, there is a monetary policy committee headed by the governor of the central bank, and there is a representative of the Ministry of Finance, representative of the Treasury, as an observer, not as a member of the monetary policy committee, to determine the correct interest rate structure in the economy.
Right.
So that independence is enjoyed by the Bank of England.
Right.
Whereas in the case of Central Bank of Sri Lanka, we have the Secretary to Ministry of Finance as a vote carrying member on the monetary board, and as a result he has a great influence on the decision making process of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka.
Right.
To that extent, I can say Central Bank of Sri Lanka is not as independent as the Bank of England.
I see. So what makes for a good governor of the central bank? What makes for a good member of the monetary board?
It all depends on the personal stature of the person involved, because even in any country we know there are relationships between the governor of the central bank and also the officials of the Ministry of Finance. and that particular relation should be a cordial relationship. So what I have observed in the past as an employee of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka for about 37 years, the governors had been fiercely independent people who had actually stood very firm on the decision that they have made.
Right.
And there had been some conflict with the official of the Ministry of Finance, but those conflicts were reconciled by the Central Bank and the Ministry of Finance very amicably.
Was this did that happen with Mr. Cabral and Dr.
No,
Jason?
it was actually prior to that. I am referring to the governors who were there prior to that period.
Right.
So when it comes to appointing a person as the governor of the Central Bank, the most important qualification is that his ability to manage the Ministry of Finance.
Right.
He must be able to manage the political pressures that would come from the Ministry of Finance, so that he can conduct monetary policy and the exchange rate policy and also interest rate policy independently of the views of the Ministry of Finance.
I see. So, and it's therefore essential to have a proper system. How does our system in the choice of governor?
In our system is a very it's a very primitive system for us, because what is happening is now in the Monetary Law Act under which the Central Bank is established. The system is that the Minister of Finance make a recommendation to the President of the Republic, and the President of the Republic appoints the person as the governor of the Central Bank and also as members of the Monetary Board for a 6-year period. But that is not the way governors and the board members are appointed in other countries today. Because instead of picking up a person from the street and appointing him as the governor of the Central Bank, there is a selection process in all these countries.
Right.
And that selection process starts about 2 years before the expiry of the term of the incumbent governor of the bank. And there's a headhunting team. That headhunting team will invite applications from all the suitable candidates. Then they shortlist these numbers to 3 members within the 2-year period. Then 3 names are recommended to the appointing authority, so that the appointing authority can select 1 out of the 3 people.
I see.
So that must be the correct procedure that we have to follow even in Sri Lanka. But to do that, we have to amend the Monetary Law Act, and we have to amend the Monetary Law Act to allow that kind of a procedure in Sri Lanka.
And also we need a bit of stable government, because obviously one can argue that Prime Minister Wickremesinghe had no idea that he would get elected.
The reason is this, but of course that is not necessary, because in order to introduce the reforms in the central bank, reforms related to central bank, you don't need a stable government for us, because what is necessary is that you have to convince the parties that are formed into the government today the necessity for introducing these vital reforms in the central bank, because these reforms are necessary for even the next government that would come to power. Because in order to maintain the credibility of the country in the eyes of the foreign investors, credibility of the country in the eyes of the people of the country, we must have an independent central bank.
I don't want to sound too flippant, but really, we noticed that various appointments in this government have been given to people who are known to be friends or associates of the Prime Minister. And I'm sure that this was the same in the previous government too. But apart from a personal friendship and or association with the Prime Minister, what is the principal, main criteria to be the governor of the central bank in the country?
Governor of the central bank must be a person, as I have already mentioned on previous occasions also, should be a person of unquestioned integrity and a person who has a deep understanding of the banking and economic affairs of the country as well as the global economic affairs. Now we can go to the neighboring country India for us, and in India the current governor Dr. Raghuram Rajan, he was appointed, before he was appointed as the Governor of the Reserve Bank of India, he was tested by the Government of India for 2 years by appointing him as an advisor to the Ministry of Finance.
Right.
So during that period, he proved himself as a suitable candidate to be the Governor of the Reserve Bank of India. And even after the Modi government came to power, the Modi government decided to retain his services because he was a professional. So when you appoint somebody as the Governor of the Central Bank, he should be a person who is acceptable not only to the ruling party, he is a person who should be acceptable to the opposition as well. So this is exactly what happened in Indian case. So we have to follow the Indian example here in Sri Lanka, and that was the expectation when John Next drafted the Montrello Act. He had the governor's term fixed at 6 years, whereas the term of the government at that time was 5 years. So his objective was that the governor would last longer than the prevailing government, so that the next government will have the benefit of the continued and consistent economic policies with the existing governor of the central bank.
I just want to quickly take you in our closing stages this morning. What of cyber security? I came across an instance of a Sri Lankan who had invested, who works abroad, and who has invested a significant amount of money. I think, if I'm not mistaken, it was $1 million in a fixed deposit in a bank in Sri Lanka on a 3-year term. And he found, when he came to wanting to access those funds, he found that his account was missing. Further investigation revealed that this bank had become victim of a Nigerian 419 fraud, and it had been hacked. And this chap hasn't been paid yet his compensation. But 2 or 3 questions. One, how safe is your money with the explosion of internet banking and so on? And 2, should the customer suffer? And 3, what should be done to prevent all this?
The answer to question number 1 for us is, now the money travels at the speed of light today, because through the internet it travels at the speed of light. Therefore, once the money is gone, you cannot recover it.
Right.
So as a result, all the banks will have to have extraordinary security measures to protect themselves.
Right.
Because there are all kinds of hackers in the international cyber criminal world, and they might hack. And one of the recent example was the bank, the victim, the Bank of Bangladesh bank became the victim of such a international criminal world. Now the second answer to the second question is that the bank will have to compensate in full the person who has lost his money, because that is the bank's mistake. And not only that, the bank has to pay damages also for him, because otherwise Sri Lanka cannot maintain its credibility as a country which would protect the hard-earned savings of the people when those savings come to Sri Lanka.
Yes, on the face of it, all things being equal, this customer of this bank would obviously need to be compensated.
He has to be fully compensated, and he can actually take his case. We have a banking ombudsman today in order to resolve these conflicts with banks and the customers. One course of action that he can take is, before he goes to court, he can refer it to the banking ombudsman, and the ombudsman will give a ruling on this particular issue, because if the bank has made the mistake because the money had been stolen because of the negligence of the bank has to fully compensate the customer on this account. And if the bank doesn't do that for us, we lose credibility.
To hear the details of this extraordinary story, if you follow the hot seat on TV1 during the week, you can get the better details of that story. In the meantime, what of the Panama Files? Interesting development. Do you think there's a lot of our money stuck there?
Exactly. I mean, because the why, first of all, for us, we have to ask the question why people take the money out of their own countries. Because they have no security within the country. That's the reason. So we have permitted people to take money out because we have not provided the security for those people to maintain their money in their own countries. But what happens is now this ill-gotten money, since they cannot keep in their home countries, they take them out, and there are various countries in the world which would entertain that kind of financial inflows. So Panama is one of the countries that has been doing it, because Panama is a country which depends on mostly for its revenue, mostly for its wealth, the type of money, ill-gotten money that has been sent to that country by various people in the world. So so we have to be very careful about this one, because right now I think the Panama list, I don't know whether there are any Sri Lankans names are available, but I read that lots of Indian names are there. Indian names are there.
Well, the ICIJ offshore leaks, of course, had a number of Sri Lankan personalities and companies there, and some of them even had forgotten, in their haste to hide their money, to hide their addresses. And so it's online for everyone to see.
So that's a situation where, far as the government will have to conduct an immediate inquiry into that, because it shows the extent of the money that has been taken out of Sri Lanka by the Sri Lankans, because that money belongs to the nation.
Indeed. On that note, thank you very much, Mr. Vijayawardena, for being on the program, and we look forward to welcoming you to our network once more soon. Take care. Thank you for watching Newsline, and have a great day. God bless.
Newsfirst, Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali.